I'm joined today by Raeford Davis, who's a former police officer with the North Charleston Police Department in South Carolina, also a speaker for LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. It's so great to have you on, and what I would love to talk to you about are your experiences with regard to drug laws and drug enforcement during your time as a police officer. Give us first kind of a broad sense of when we talk about your time as a police officer and drugs. What types of interactions made up the drug related incidents?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, David. That's right. I was a police officer from 2002, 2007. City of North Charleston is about 80,000 population, about 300-man police force. We were the 8th most dangerous city at the time. I spent 4 years on patrol, and our main mission was to get guns and drugs off the streets. So we were a very active police department, and we had a pretty busy area that I worked in. I made hundreds of arrests, many of them drug-related, from just very small crack pipes up to murder-related, drug-related murder investigations.
And when you would arrest someone, for example, for something like a crack pipe, what went through your head in terms of evaluating whether this was the best use of your time in terms of the effect on public safety?
Well, you try to justify it, and the idea is that if you arrest somebody that you think is maybe up to no good or something early, that prevents a more serious crime later on. And after a while, you realize that that's not the case, that you're actually causing more harm and putting more people at a disadvantage by arresting and incarcerating them. That does not give them any benefit.
So talk to us about what that path is. Someone might hear this and say, hey, if someone has a crack pipe, that's against the law. It makes sense to arrest that person, get them into the judicial system, get them into the prison system as prescribed by the law. Make the case as to how you figured out that didn't make sense.
Well, you would arrest them again later, and this time maybe, and then they would then it would be like a felony charge or a second offense or something like that, and then they would just go right back. It cost them a whole lot of money as far as like bail bondsmen. Going back and forth to court. So if these people have any kind of job or family associations, by continue to arrest them, you're continuing to break off any positive social connections they have, and you actually drive them more towards more drug use.
Is this view that you're talking to us about today one that you would share with fellow officers?
Well, it's very difficult to understand when you're there as a police officer, and you do have real crime, and that is mixed in with it, and so it's difficult to separate the two. And you think you're doing the right thing. That's everything I was ever taught. Drugs are bad, which they are, and we've got to go out there and stop them. And it's just us, holding this line through some kind of chaos. And so you go in believing that, and that you're doing the right thing.
But were there, I guess what I'm trying to get at was, were there any candid conversations you would have with fellow officers where you guys get together and you might say, listen, I know we're just enforcing the law here, and we believe that drugs are for many a destructive force, but is this really the best legal structure around drugs, or is there a better way that our time might be used, for example?
Well, certainly with marijuana, you'll get virtually every officer will agree that marijuana needs to be legalized. Now they'll have concerns about how you apply it to driving and maybe youth drug use. They would have concerns with that, but otherwise they would love to not deal with marijuana. And the other drugs, or as a patrol officer, you would try to, overlook you try to manage your arrest and those type of things to in whatever way you thought possible to make an impact without harming others. But the law on itself is harmful, and so it was difficult to straighten it out later.
When you hear now about the discussions around revenue and marijuana and drugs in general for police departments, were you aware at the time that you were a police officer in North Charleston, South Carolina, of the connection between drug seizures and kind of the money chain around the war on drugs and the funding of police departments?
Well, on our level, kind of on the small street level, we're not collecting a whole bunch of drugs or a lot of cash. It was not a lot. Now, for the people that we arrest and interrupt, it was a lot for them. But as far as our police department, it was not a huge amount. But it was certainly in the Narcotics Bureau. They certainly looked at drugs and cash seizures, and that determined who they would arrest and when they would arrest them.
What do you think would be, let's focus for now on the drug part of it, and then I want to get into police militarization a little bit. With regard to drugs, what would you say would be the best sort of policy to adopt? You said marijuana legalization, certainly. What do you think should be the legal status of other drugs?
I believe that all drugs should be legalized. Prohibition does not work. It does not matter the drug. Now, every drug has its own issues, and certainly heroin is more powerful than marijuana, and so you would have different regulations for it. But it's the prohibition laws and enforcement of those that creates so much of the crime, the atmosphere for this gang violence. It creates the profit motive with these huge markups. Thousands of percent. A gram of methamphetamine costs 14 cents to produce down in Mexico, and they're selling it for $80 a gram. So that creates a lot of crime. The cash business creates a lot of crime. So all of that. So legalization of all drugs with appropriate regulation depending on the different type of drug.
So last thing I want to touch on is, what's the connection between all of this discussion of drugs and the trend we've seen towards increased police militarization? We're seeing no-knock raids of those suspected of having sometimes even not that significant amounts of drugs in their homes. We've seen actually a SWAT officer who was killed by a suspect, and a jury did not convict that individual because the no-knock raid legitimately gave the suspect no reason to think that it was law enforcement even entering his home. We're seeing police use of force escalate. Do you see a connection between the war on drugs and this police militarization?
Absolutely. And that's really the main reason why I like to speak out against drug use. That's the nexus between law enforcement militarization is mainly through the war on drugs. And that's how we've gotten to where we're doing these these SWAT style commando raids, not for an arrest warrant, but for a search warrant. And remember, these drug use is consensual activity and trade between adults. And you do not have the right to use violence to interfere with that activity.
So I'm hearing that for you, based on the language you're using, correct me if I'm wrong, this is more of a libertarian sort of concern that you have around this.
Well, it is for me personally, it is a moral issue. When I made drug arrest, I felt something wasn't quite right. This it's bothered my conscience that I was arresting people for nonviolent activity, and deep down, I believe that it was not right morally, and it does interfere with our inalienable rights.
All right. We've been speaking with Raeford Davis, former police officer in North Charleston, South Carolina, speaker for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. A very interesting point of view. Thanks so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you, David.